Yeah, I know, our live streaming. I'd like to call this meeting of the Merrimack School District Budget Committee to order. I ask that you please all rise and join Naomi and everybody else in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reviewing the budgets of food service, student services, technology, and library media, maintenance, and district-wide. Going to take just a couple of seconds here to call Carol Lang to get her online.
Hello?
Hello, Carol. How are you?
Okay.
You are live at the Budget Committee meeting. I'm going to do the old questions. As you well know.
One of these years I'll surprise you and be somewhere other than Florida.
Where are you currently?
Satellite Beach, Florida.
And is there anybody with you?
Just my cat, Ginger.
Our resident mascot cat.
Yep.
We're going to be starting with budget reviews on food service, just to let you know.
Okay.
At this time, I'd like to ask David to come on up. David is our food services director. Liaisons were myself, Heather, John Hanson, and Carol Lang. I will say first that the breakfast snacks yesterday morning were excellent, and our kids are eating whole grain products, and they actually taste good.
Absolutely.
Would you like to go first, or would you like the liaisons to go first?
I'll let the liaisons go first.
All righty.
I'll follow up.
I'm going to let Heather start off, please.
Let me give my thanks as well. We really appreciate you taking your time. I've mentioned this to you before, but I think your food service staff does a remarkable job at helping our kids stay healthy and start their day off and continue their day in a very healthy way. So we really appreciate all the time that you spent, and please pass along our thanks as well. We did go through a very even budget, not a lot of asks there. There is some equipment, which I'm sure you'll go over with us, that are definitely necessary, and I look forward to you giving us any information about future expenses that you think are on the horizon and letting us know those things as well. Thank you.
Carol, do you have anything you wanted to impart?
No, I'm all set.
Okay. On mine, Heather said it all, and the nice thing is we have a great food service. They serve very good and wholesome food. They're following the federal guidelines and keeping up with the times and making some progress. John, did you want to make any comments at all?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. David, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I would like to go over the budget for the food service for 2018, 2019. As you know, the budget does reflect the cost for operating the 6 schools in the district. We had a couple of items for replacement of equipment this year on the budget. First would be 2 hot display cases for the high school. Currently, the ones we have been in use for over 20 years apiece. The display cases are used in the snack bar and the sandwich room, and basically they would be replacing the existing ones. The new ones would give us a better holding time and temperature for the products that we use, and extend the life of the product in there. and give the kids a more delicious sandwich or snack that we do provide. The second one on the table is production table at the upper elementary school. Again, the table has been there since I've been in food service, maybe over 24 years. The existing table has some structural issues, and we're proposing a new one that has wheels on it that can be moved around easily, so it's easier for the maintenance staff to come in and clean the kitchens, and it's less dangerous to have to lift those things and move them out of the kitchen when they're doing that. So as far as the rest of the budget, I think Heather said that it's pretty level funded. There's really nothing that stands out except for the equipment that we have this year. If we look at page by page, I think the only thing I would like to mention is that the paper products and the food products that we do purchase are part of the New Hampshire Buying Group. So we do have a bid every 2 years for products purchased within the state. The Buying Group is a group of over 50 school districts in New Hampshire that is operated by one of our food service directors in Laconia, and every year the bid goes out and we get the best possible pricing for our products. So that's been very good. As far as the equipment, I think like you were saying, for futures, we kind of look at equipment every year and see what might need to be replaced. There's nothing that would be, like maintenance where they're going to replace the roofs every so many years. We try to extend the life of our equipment as long as we can, so that it lessens the expense. We do general preventative maintenance on them, so we try to keep them operating at peak efficiency. So that's all I have tonight.
And one thing we need to point out, especially for the folks at home, the money that you take in stays within the food service and is used only for food service
Correct.
and nothing else.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't affect the tax rate.
Correct.
In regard to cost of lunches,
Mhm.
if you could just explain the process of determining the cost of a lunch and why that is so.
As far as the cost of lunches go, we are, of course, we have to apply every year for National School Lunch Program. So part of the application process includes a paid lunch equity piece. And what the paid lunch equity is that we're required to show proof that the prices that we charge for the paying students are equal or greater than what the reimbursement rates are for the free and reduced payments that we do receive from the federal government. So every year I have to plug in numbers into an equation and try to make sure that we're at that level. And if it dips below, then I have to try to figure out what's the best solution as far as raising prices. I could do it district-wide for a small amount, or I could do it school by school and try to bring that up so it averages out to that point. So every year it becomes a little more difficult, depending on what the federal reimbursement rates are jumped up to every year. So, and that's basically what it is. I would wish that we would be able to do it differently, but that's the guidelines that we do follow for the National School Lunch Program.
So if you had your way, the price would probably be lower, but then you'd be in violation of the school lunch program.
Well, it would be stable. I think that's the way I want to look at it. I might have to raise it every so often, but stabilize it so that we're not jumping around.
Okay, thank you. Questions for David? Kevin?
I have a question about the trays and such that are used.
Yeah.
Are they styrofoam?
Yes.
Okay. The question comes from actually my son, who's a senior in this school, and his question to me was, do we use recyclable materials? And if not, why not?
Well, we use styrofoam. The reason why we don't have any washing facilities in the schools. Some of the students in the high school have looked at trying to see if there's any way to do compostable, and that's something that's in discussion right now. The price for compostable trays, something that would be would break down quicker than the styrofoam, is about 2.5 to 3 times more expensive than the styrofoam at this point. So some of the plastic bottles that we do for the milk and such, and the bottled water, those do get recycled as long as the students put them in a recycling bins. So my suggestion to them was to try to do a promotion to try to get them to hit the barrel and get those things recycled and out of our landfills.
Okay, so thanks. So but the tray issue is it's purely a cost issue at this point.
At this
It's
point,
significant
yeah.
cost change. Okay, thank you.
Carol, do you have any questions?
No, I think I'm all set.
Okay. Going around the table, any other hands up for questions for David? Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too, thanks.
Next up on our list is Student Services. I'd like to ask John Fabrizio, who's the Director of Student Services, to come on down. The liaisons were David Ilg was the lead, Amanda Heidberger, and Naomi Schoenfeld.
Good evening.
Good evening, John. Do you want to go first, or do you want your liaisons to go first?
Well, I think David and I had a wonderful conversation, so I'm going to let David go first.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for meeting with me. We met last Tuesday before our other board meeting. John and I talked about a lot of things. The student service budget is built a lot around the laws governing special education. So we talked about those a little bit. Overall, his budget is up just under 2.5% this year. The original budget he proposed was about 2.6, but was able to make some cuts through the school board, and that's what we're seeing here today. Some of those cuts were with tutoring charges. Some other things he has in the budget is split AC units for students with respiratory and environmental challenges. It's a pretty big ticket, $30,000. Sound field systems for universally designed classrooms. One of the things that will just be this year is the document management. We're going to be going to scanned files. That should help with if we ever had damage at the building, any type of water damage or anything. Some maintenance going forward, but overall probably a pretty cost-effective solution. We won't be keeping thousands upon thousands of records in a basement somewhere. He's looking for a new van this year, replace the other one. It's 10 years old, over 100,000 miles. The plan with the old van is either to repurpose it or donate to somewhere. And then there's a change in vendor, which I'll let John speak to more, but the vendor we used last year, Ceresc, it closed down. So there's some cost increase there, but John can speak better to that than I can.
Amanda, do you have anything you'd like to add? Naomi? Okay. It's your turn, John.
Well, thank you. David, thank you. Nice job with the rendering. It was really right on. Really, two major laws that govern my budget. It's different than some of the other budgets where my budget's built meeting by meeting, along with parents, for a number of children in our district, over 600 children, where we look for their specialized needs and care for them. And it's really based on two major laws that govern it, and that's that one, that they have a free and appropriate education, that we allow them to be educated with their peers in our school systems. And the second one really comes down to that has to happen within the least restrictive environment for their needs. We have to try the regular classroom. That's the law. It governs that. And then beyond that, once the regular classroom may not be the most suitable environment by themselves, we add supports in there, we add services in there. And then from there, if that's not effective, we move to resource room. And then if resource room's not effective, we sometimes have to move to day placements outside of our school. And then from on there, residential placements and hospitalizations. So there's a continuum of services that the law very clearly identifies that the teams meet about, and they find what is that least restrictive environment for that child that meets his needs for education. And that's how each one of the over 600 students that we work with is built for services. And then in the end, it's all put together, and hence we see a budget that lands in my area. So we talked about my total increase first proposed was 2.65. Then with a cut to my line item of tutoring, we did an average, Matt Chevenel and I sat and did an average over the last 5 to 6 years of what was spent with all my tutoring accounts. And we took that includes all the buildings, and it includes our summer tutoring. And we took all those and averaged out that, yeah, we saw a little bit where we could take about a $20,000 cut in that to average out. Does it mean that that money won't need to be allocated in the future? I don't know. And we've talked about this many times. And I think, Stan, you know the story. We don't know what's going to happen to children as the year progresses next year. We don't know how many will be hospitalized. We don't know what may happen in accidents. We don't know those things. So our tutoring budget is based on that. But if we average it out and look at it, it was a cut that we felt was reasonable. So that's where we landed with that. And I landed about 2.48% overall in my budget for increase. And I think David did a nice job mentioning the AC units and the van and the document management. Those are all things that are in there this year that's new. And the thing that he touched upon really was that we had a change in vendor. Ceresk is a vendor that we used for years in our district, and we were a member district of Ceresk, and it was a way for us to very cost effectively bring in speech services, OT services, vision and blind services, some psychological testing, some counseling. It was a way for us to work with other districts in kind of a conglomerate to hire people at a lower rate to be able to use them, and it was a nonprofit company. Well, as of last year, due to some financial issues, Ceresk no longer offered that option to our district this coming school year. So from about May on, we had to go out and find new vendors. Very short period of time from May to July 1st to guarantee all the services that we already previously wrote in the IEPs. So we had to take an opportunity to research vendors. I researched many, came up with vendors that are for-profit vendors. And with the for-profit vendors, they cost more. And quite frankly, that's why, having to move from Ceresk, we have a significant increase in some of our accounts for that to happen and meet the needs that we've guaranteed for these children in their IEPs. And beyond that, I feel that the budget has stayed pretty steady within our out-of-district placements. We had a very, very slight increase in there, and we have kept our numbers pretty consistently where they are in out-of-district placements. And I think that overall our numbers, we're seeing a slight decline of about 10 students next year projected, and that's where we are. So is there any other questions?
First of all, thank you for the job that you do working with all these very special people that need a little extra help. And please keep up the good work. Do we have any questions for John or comments? Chuck?
I'm a little curious. Relative to the cut in tutoring, it sounds as if it was based on financial considerations alone, and I'm wondering what the actual effect is going to be of having that cut.
So when Matt Chevenel and I looked at the numbers and we said, really over multiple accounts is what we did. And looked at it and said, really, where has our average been over a long period of time? And where the average has been, it led us to a little bit of an overage, we would say at that point. And we said, okay, well, that is a place that we could financially cut, as you said. And I think that right now, to project where we would be, hopefully it will cover what we have, and we're hopeful in that. And to project to say it definitely will or it definitely won't, I can't say that at this point, but I can say that if we looked at an average over a long period of time, that's how we would say that we should be okay.
Matt, would you like to add something?
Yeah, the methodology was, as John explained, we went back over a 6-year historical period and looked at those accounts and found out even the highest year expenditure was around $20,000 less than what we were estimating for this year. However, to get to the whole point of your question, it's not going to impact any tutoring service that special services, student services has to offer, because they'll do that anyway. And if we need money, we can either cover it in another area of the budget, or we could go into the emergency fund, which we have set up. There's a capital reserve fund set up for emergencies, around $500,000 in there, that we could go to that fund, ask the board, because they're agents, to expend and get the money for it that way, if there was a need.
You'll pardon me if that doesn't sound like a convincing alternative to me. The purpose of a budget is, in fact, to budget, not to reduce spending. And I remain unconvinced by your testimony that this is, in fact, the wise and prudent cut from the proposed budget of the department. Perhaps you could say something that would convince me that you haven't yet
That I haven't yet said?
Haven't yet said.
I don't know, Mr. Moore. You're a formidable jouster here at the table, so I'm not sure if I could do much to convince you, but, other than what I've already said. But, you know, when you look back 6 years and you see a trend and you've never hit that high water mark in 6 years, what's the probability of you hitting it in the 7th? And as John said, his budget doesn't really, based on past history, because there can be spikes. So I don't really think there's anything I could do to convince you fully. It was a means to look for a $20,000 reduction based upon historical data that we could justify as reasonable and prudent at the time. That's all I can really say.
But it wasn't, in fact, your reduction in the budget. It was the school board's reduction in the budget.
That is
correct?
Yes. Yes, sir.
And so you found a convincing argument to acquiesce to their cutting the budget.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's what administrators do when a school board gives them a directive. And then they try to convince everybody that everything will be just fine. But I still remain unconvinced relative to the true purpose in having advanced that figure for the budget. And I have no way of knowing, other than, I suppose, going to a school board meeting or watching a school board meeting on TV, neither of which I have done. But I'm somewhat baffled by the soundness of the recommendation to make that cut, despite your ability to acquiesce to it.
Well, the only thing I could say is that if the $20,000 were needed, past history has shown that it hasn't, but if it were, I'll just reiterate that we have the Emergency Capital Reserve Fund, Expendable Trust Fund for special services that we could dip into to cover that shortfall if there were to be a shortfall. So that's the fail-safe, basically.
I'd
I
like
know
to-
that didn't do much to convince you, but I just throw that out there again.
I'd like to interrupt a second. In regard to the $20,000 cut, was that cut based on the new rates that you're now paying the for-profit companies, or was that cut based on the nonprofit rates you used to pay?
These line items, the line items for tutoring aren't associated with Ceresc or any of that, or that vendor, or those vendors
Okay.
anymore. Most of our tutors are hired within our district, or they're former teachers who come back and work for us part-time and do some of that work, and they're hired per tutor for us.
At a set rate, or is it a negotiated rate, or?
It's a set rate,
It's a set rate.
yeah.
So it didn't matter, you cut $20,000 of tutoring money, and how many hours of tutoring does that come out to be?
It's roughly around 1,000 hours of tutoring.
About 1,000 hours. And you feel reasonably confident that unless we have a major influx of people that need tutoring, you're going to have enough money?
At this point, as I said, I can't predict who's going to need tutoring next year. What I do know is I do have, as Matt said, the reserve account if we got to that point where we said, well, that we went, it was too substantial a cut, so we have to go back and meet the needs of children. We still have to meet the needs of the students. So if we have to go back and do that, I have to go to the fund and with Matt, and we'll do that.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chuck. Do you have anything else you wanted to?
I would like to impress upon my colleagues here and the administrators of the district that this is in fact a budget. It is not a contract, it is a budget. And we here particularly are charged with a prudential responsibility for a budget. I understand that we may not have to suffer the same political backlash from making cuts or advancing expenditures that other elected officials do, but it is a budget. We have a history here in Merrimack of returning a substantial amount of money through very wise administration and management, that we have never had to have a supplemental budget, appropriation, or for that matter, I don't think we've ever been on our knees wearing holes out in our pants praying that we would in fact have a surplus that we are required by law to have. And so I would like to extend some caution in the budgetary process to put the money up front, knowing full well that if it's not needed, that we will not spend it, and it will be returned as a surplus at the end of the year. But I'm a little uncomfortable with making cuts with the reverse intent of simply cutting a budget. A budget has a purpose, a very wise and sound purpose. I guess I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
And I would remind everyone that next week at our work session, if you feel so inclined, you can always make a motion to add something to that budget. And that's one of the things we are allowed to do. Now, the school board doesn't have to spend it, but we're giving our guidance and direction. If the majority of us agree, if somebody wants something added or cut, we have that opportunity. I think 1,000 hours in cut services that's a lot of time taken off. And I'm concerned about that too. Is there going to be enough money there? And do we really should we take it out of the emergency fund? Is it truly emergency when we could have budgeted for it? I was under the impression when that emergency fund was made that was for the instances of having a new student move into town and need our services, or transfer from another school district into our school district, and obviously they weren't planned to be here, so there would not be any money in the budget for them. And I thought that's one of the reasons that fund was created.
Yeah, that was definitely the thought process behind it. And I believe it noted in the Warren article, I have it back in my computer somewhere, but any unforeseen or emergency type purposes that would lend us into a deficit situation in the special ed department.
Which we definitely can't do.
Right, correct.
Does anybody, Naomi?
I thought I'd wade in on this one a little bit. It's, sorry, gratifying to have this come forward, because what I'm hearing is the idea that this group, which I agree with, does not want to cut services or risk a cut to services, and that's a very important point. From the school board perspective, mine at least representing that conversation, the point wasn't to threaten services in any way, but to ask whether that particular budget line had been misset higher than it had ever had to be used. And therefore, if it were more appropriate, to choose a budget level that represented past use. Now, budgets can be built many ways, and one can absolutely suggest that it was brought down too far. And that's a very helpful conversation to have here. But I think that the idea was not to change services in any way, but to ask whether the budget represented the expenditures.
And what counsel was given to the school board to make that decision?
Past data, the highs and lows of the past years, as Matt was talking about, and taking a look at what the high tide mark has been in the past.
So you're telling
Dan,
me...
could I weigh in on that?
Hold on, Carol. You'll be next.
All right.
You're telling me that this was a cut advanced by the administration and agreed to by the school board?
It was one of many possible suggestions put forward by administration as ways to find cuts if the board wished to do so, and it's the one that we felt might be prudent as simply an adjustment based on the past as opposed to a change in services.
Carol, you're next. Go ahead.
Okay, first I'll stick to the tutoring, and then I have a couple of other questions on different aspects. But on the tutoring, I would be the last person to want to cut back on tutoring services because I think they're sorely needed. However, I don't think it's our purpose, whether it be for us, the budget committee, or for the school board, to intentionally over budget if we can look historically and say that money has not been spent in the past. So I don't want to in any way cut tutoring services. But if history shows us that we've time and time again budgeted this money and not spent it, then I don't think it's prudent for us to keep following it year after year in the budget just because that's what was always in there. It doesn't make sense if we're not spending it. So I guess that's my take on that line item. As long as I can be assured that, A, we're going to maintain the level of service we have provided, and secondly, if a greater need is to arise, we will provide those services however we have to find the money to do it.
Okay, and what else did you want to talk about?
Okay, couple things. One is on transportation. The increase with the new contract, is that a new transportation company that we're using?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, Carol.
And did we change companies because the other one wasn't available? I mean, the cost is going up, but did we change companies for a reason, or why are we doing something that costs more?
The end of the contract came. That particular vendor, as well as others, were asked to bid. We had tried to get an extension on the existing contract, and that wasn't forthcoming. So bids were accepted, and that was the lowest bid, and it was a bid that we chose to take, just not because of money, because of, after a meeting with the provider, the company, we felt comfortable that we could work with them in the long term. So it's a brand new 5-year contract. The average increase is around 3.5% after this year.
Okay. I was trying to, weigh both factors of, why are we going to somebody with more cost, but also making sure that we have a contractor that, is going to provide the level of services that we expect. So it sounds like that's correct. My other question is still transportation related, but slightly different. And this may be one of those things where from time to time I pick up on something that may have been in the budget book for years and I'm just now picking up on it. But I'm looking at multiple lines for transportation, and in the explanation it kind of every time says paying for transportation by a parent or contractor to in or out of district. In some cases it was summer, some cases it was regular year, whatever. And I was not aware we were in the position of paying parents for transportation. And if it's new, why? And if it's not new, how long has it been that way?
That's been in there, and again, a lot of decisions are made with transportation along with the rest of the IEP in a team meeting with the parent involved in it. And in some cases, there has been cases where we've reimbursed versus it's just been sometimes sometimes based on the child not being able to be transported because of their needs in any other kind of vehicle, because it's a specialized vehicle the parent may own. Or it may be the case that there is a one instance of in a location where the parent has agreed to transport, and it may be more cost effective to do it that way. So we make the determination that's what happens.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not in a position of, and I'll just pull a hypothetical out of thin air, of paying 5 different parents to transport 5 different students to the same place day after day.
No, that isn't the case, Carol.
Okay. All right. I guess that's the end of my questions.
Okay. Anybody else? Chuck?
If I could return for a moment to the tutoring issue.
By all means.
Well, Carol made some comments that suggested that if we had an assurance that these funds wouldn't be needed, that perhaps we would be over budgeting if we included the projected original budget. We have the director here this evening, and we have the finance superintendent here this evening. I don't believe you've been able to give us an assurance that the original budgeted amount wouldn't be needed. Your assurances were that you could always dip into the emergency fund if you had to. So Mrs. Lang was looking for an assurance that, in fact, those funds wouldn't be needed. So it's a question of, can you assure us that they won't be needed, or can you assure us that if they are needed, you're going to dip into the emergency fund? Both of those are critical in our understanding of how to appropriately budget.
Okay, I'll be honest with you. We can assure you that the services will be provided regardless of what that budget line item says. We cannot assure you that we will not overexpend that line. Just because of the nature of the beast as far as tutoring services, it's not something that you can regularly schedule and look at and make an exact prediction, depending upon circumstance.
Well, I'm not really looking for an assurance that the expenditures will be made. We have a relatively large budget, and the bottom line is the bottom line. But this is not how a budget should be created, by simply defending the expenditure, if necessary, will take place. We could assume that that same position would be taken on any line item in the budget if we wanted to reduce it by some amount. And then, of course, ultimately, that would lead to the logic that it's not a budget that allows for the full and comprehensive needs of the school district. So I remain a little unconvinced that the services are going to be adequately treated in the budget, along with every other line item that we are responsible for adequately being treated in the budget. I will not accept the idea that, well, if we have to, we'll find the money somewhere. That's not what a budget is, it's not what a budget process is, and that's not what our prudential responsibility is in overseeing this budgetary process.
Thank you, Chuck. David Ilg.
Could I?
Hold on, Carol.
Correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing in the past 6 or 7 years' history that says we need this additional money. We've overspent this. This line has been over budgeted for 6 years.
Yes, even looking, not taking an average, but looking at the highest year out of the 6, we would still $20,000 underexpended in this line.
Okay,
in these grouping of lines.
Yeah, so it's a budget that's been over budgeted for this specific thing.
When you look at the past 6 years, correct.
We have an emergency fund for unknown. So for us to spend $20,000 over this year would be what the emergency fund's there for, right?
Mm-hmm.
The unknown. We have no known reason to spend $20,000 more on this particular item.
Yeah.
Then I would suggest that reflects rather poorly on the administrative positions of the most recent years, in which apparently a $20,000 excess escaped both the Budget Committee and the administration.
Okay, so when I met with John, he explained it. Am I not getting picked up? Oh, okay. Oh. When I spoke to John, he said it more or less came down to a bunch of small line items that added up to $20,000. It wasn't one particular over budgeted item. It was all of them kind of grouped together, and then when the school board kind of brought it up, they realized that it was a bunch of small items that lumped up to $20,000. Is that?
Yeah. There was a question by the school board to go back and look at historical data regarding these accounts. We came back with that historical data, presented them with the information, and the school board made the decision that they thought, in their mind, that this line item, looking at it, was perhaps over budgeted in years past, and they were going to make the corrective action this year in 18-19. That's exactly what happened.
And yeah, I mean, we over budgeted the last 6 years. I mean, all we can do going forward is be better. And that's what we're trying to do this year, right?
Jordan?
I mean, I agree, but I also, from what I've heard, this is the type of item in the budget that there's a lot of mystery behind because you don't know what the needs are going to be. So it's not like rubbish pickup in the maintenance budget where we know that it's 52 weeks and it's X amount per week and you can budget for it, to me, maybe I'm missing something, but it sounds like we don't know what the needs are going to be, right? Based on if there's children that are going to be in a hospital setting or based on the circumstances of the year. So, I mean, me personally, I mean, I'm frustrated that we over budgeted if that's what happened for so many years. But I also think that what I've heard is that we're not saying we're going to provide 1,000 hours less of tutoring. We're simply stating that we've been over budgeting for this. Let's come up with an amount that's more realistic to past data. And God forbid, if we actually need it, it's not like we're not going to provide those services. So, do you have an idea of really? It's kind of two questions. One, what percentage this $20,000 is of the whole tutoring budget? I didn't add up I know it's broken out by school, but I'd be curious what percentage we're talking about, and also if you have any data, if not exact, at least general thoughts about how far away from the number we've been in the past.
Yeah, I know it was high school and middle school.
So where it was taken out of eventually was out of the high school and the middle school accounts. Two line items where we took the majority of the money out of to say we had to hit somewhere versus hitting all multiple accounts. We hit two line items, and it was out of tutoring salary high school and tutoring salary, the tutoring salaries. And that's where it came out of there.
Okay, I love these things. Here's my tutoring spreadsheet. Okay, you can be my witness. See all the lines, Joan?
There's a lot of lines.
The total amount of tutoring is around $210,000. That's what was there prior to the $20,000 cut. When you look backwards, we spent in 12-13, let's see, 10-11, 176, 11-12, 171, 12-13, 181, 13-14, 167, 14-15, 162, 15-16, we spent 205, 16-17, 172. So those are the numbers we went with.
So that sounds to me like we're looking at like a 15 to 10%, 10 to 15% reduction in the budgeted
10%.
Budgeted amount.
Yes. A little less than 10. Overall.
Anybody else?
Yes, Dan.
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, I'm basically looking at this as if the argument for keeping the $20,000 in is just to have it there for just in case it's needed, you could make that same argument to make it $50,000 higher. You could make that argument for any number higher. So to me, the only rational way to budget for this is to use historical data. And if the historical data is showing I was doing it in my head as Matt was rattling off numbers, so I may have missed something, but the numbers that I heard, I only heard 1 year in there where we even approached that $20,000 less threshold. So I'm saying historically, it's telling us it hasn't been needed, and that's the only guide we have, and we do still have that safety cushion of if something pops out of the blue that nobody foresaw, we do have the emergency run money, or we also have the money from other line items if they're not needed. But if we haven't been spending it, I can't see allocating it just to refund it at the end of the year. If there were a history of some years we need it, some years we don't, then I would be all for keeping that money in for the years that we need it. But it doesn't sound like that's been the case.
Thank you, Carol. Kevin.
So I agree with Carol that this seems to make complete sense to me. If we can't be exact on the budget because we don't know the needs, all we can go is with historical numbers, which is how you would build a budget in any business. And the other point is, we can't just guess that we're going to need, an infinite amount of money and add that to every single line item. That's what the emergency fund's for. So it sounds like it's sound logic and good budgeting to me. So thank you.
Chuck?
It's not a number that was pulled out of thin air. It was requested by the Director of Special Services and then cut by the school board. So it's not an arbitrary number that somehow or another we're suggesting should be put back in the budget. It was requested by the department head. What we asked the department head was for an assurance that we would not need that $20,000 that he had requested, that the school board and the administration saw fit to cut for administrative reasons. So I'm still looking for that assurance from the Director of Special Education that we will not need the $20,000, that it was in fact a budgeting error and that we will not need it. I cannot agree to a default position of, well, we could always find it in the emergency budget. That's not what a prudent budget process should acquiesce to.
One last go-around. Anybody else? John?
How often does the emergency line item get called upon?
We used to probably, around 6 years ago, I think there was out-of-district tuition expenditure for around $136,000. That seems to ring a bell. Around 5-6 years ago.
So not very common.
No, that was the only time we had actually extracted any money out of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John. Next up, technology and library media. And I'd like to welcome Nancy Rose, our Technology and Library Media Director. The liaisons were John Hanson, the lead, Brandy Nunez, and Chuck Mower. Welcome.
Thank you.
Would
Good
you
evening.
like your liaisons to speak first, or you?
John and I agree John would go.
Okay, John?
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. We met last Wednesday, had a conversation in the conference room. This department, the domain of this department is really technology, and no one seems to want less of that nowadays. It's always increased. And Nancy made clear that the capacity increase is sort of a big item for her budget, and capacity increase would mean rewiring for a higher category of bandwidth throughout the school system, wireless access points, upgrades or additions to the laptop carts or the mobile computing carts, updates to cabling. Another item that her budget includes is upgrades to the intercom systems throughout various locations within the district. I guess old systems that are hard to work on, and if they get broke, you need the newer stuff. There's been a project to get classroom projectors installed in all the rooms, and that's nearly complete. And as that completes, the budget shifts to more of a maintenance mode for all of those installed projectors. And then typical, well, I think of the library as books, and there are items within the budget for maintenance of the library components. I think there was a bookbinding line item that had a lot of pent-up backlog that's finally going to be addressed in this year's budget. I think that was about all that I can remember and all that I had notes about, if that's...
Chuck, did you have anything you'd like to add? Nope. Okay, Nancy, it's all yours.
Well, John did a very nice job. Thank you. My budget just continues to support teaching and learning. So John hit on the high points. We're looking to update and add laptops. One of the goals of the capital improvement plan was to reduce the replacement years on our computers so that we're within a reasonable amount of time, which reduces the cost for support. We're continuing to beef up the infrastructure to support more mobile learning, so that includes cabling upgrades and installing wireless access points. One of the goals for this next year is to get as close to one in every classroom, one access point per classroom as we can. And we're also working on classroom technology, as he mentioned, the projectors, but in John's budget for student supports, he mentioned sound field systems. So that's a partnership between John and I. So he's been purchasing the equipment, and then my operation oversees the installation. The nice part about that is when we put in a sound field system, it captures all of the sound in the room, where the old sound fields, the standalones, would capture the teacher voice, and that was it. They wore a lanyard. With this, it ties into the computer sound, so anything projected and shared and then the teacher voice is all part of one system. And excuse me, it also avoids feedback, which was one of the issues that we were running into. And then it supports the library program, which is a going concern. It's a very active library program. The librarians are teachers, and we also, I'm happy to say, we've hired some new librarians in the last couple of years because we've had some retirements, and so they've got kind of a fresh perspective, and we want to continue to support their work. And then I think the newest thing is there's a line item in the capital improvement for STEM, and that's to support equipment for science, technology, engineering, and math instruction, to find ways to bring in some innovative approaches to learning that involve technology. So it's a new area to try to just give us a little boost in that area. It's a district-wide line. But that's really all. It's more of a maintenance and ongoing program budget. So that's all I had, if there's any questions.
Questions for Nancy? Some of the items you've mentioned, you're replacing some of the older cables that were put in, I'm not sure how many years ago at this point.
A long time.
A long time. They had Bill Gates' name probably on it back then. Any other questions or comments for Nancy?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Carol.
All right, this may be just me thinking too rigidly about a term, and maybe it means something other than what I thought, but the rebinding of the texts. In my mind, text implies like the kind of books you would use in a classroom situation to teach from. And so if that were the case, I'm saying, why is that in the library's budget? If you just mean books, maybe I'm just misinterpreting the word.
It's library books. It's part of the collection. It's not textbooks.
Okay. To me, text means textbooks, which implies classroom textbooks. So it's just my thinking wasn't in line with what you were trying to say, so that's okay. And then my only other question, and I don't think there's a good answer to this, but I'll throw it out for just whatever. I always wonder, as we've gotten more and more into an age where technology advances at a more and more rapid rate, how we protect ourselves when we're doing things like, for instance, projectors in the classrooms and, whatever. And all of that I'm all in favor of. But how do we protect ourselves that we don't spend a lot of money and constantly be behind the curve of having to update to the next new thing? And I don't know if there's an answer, but...
It's definitely a moving target, Carol. And I think one of the things that we've experienced with the capital improvement plan when we started several years ago, we were installing based on what was sort of the current connectivity, and then through the last couple of years we've had to change that connectivity just because standards change. So we have some that's current and some that will need to be updated, but as we have to repair a broken projector or replace something, we look at it then. So I don't try to fix problems if they continue to work and if we can still have interoperability. And I think it's the nature of technology. It's not a solvable problem. It's just something that we deal with kind of ongoing. But I don't preemptively solve a situation if what we have works and works well unnecessarily.
Right, and what you're saying is kind of the same conclusion I'm coming to. I was just hoping you were going to have a brainstorm that I haven't had of how to protect against the rapidly changing technology, but I think we're all a victim of it.
Yeah, if you can stifle innovation, but I don't think we want to do that.
No.
All set, Carol?
Yes.
Is there an answer
Sure.
to that in leasing?
Leasing is part of just for keeping the computer life cycle smaller. Leasing does, well, it's not leasing, it's just the hardware has different kinds of connections with it. So whatever we buy every year may have a different issue that we have to deal with. That's one of the reasons that the supply line has grown, is different kinds of cables and adapters to keep what we have working. I don't want to bore you with technical terms, but some of our older projectors, we have to use adapters to still work with them, but when we put the adapter in, it still works. So, yeah.
Anybody else? You got off easy.
No,
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Have a good night.
Next up on the list is the Maintenance Department. And I would ask for Tom Trousseau to come down. And I'm not sure, you got to have Matt with you too, or not?
That's up to Matt. That would be up to
Okay.
Matt.
Okay. The liaisons for maintenance were Jordan was the lead, Carol Lang, and myself. Would you like to go first, or do you want your liaisons to go first?
Liaisons, please.
Jordan?
I'll take that, thank you. So we had a great meeting reviewing the maintenance budget for the year, and obviously this is a department where there's significant costs with keeping what we have operating and working and functioning as economically possible with old equipment and old things that just break down and need to get replaced. So in a general sense, the budget is pretty level funded from past years. There's, little increases here or there, specifically related to building upkeep and the repair account for replacement or upgrading of specific items. But beyond that, there's really three components to this budget that are significant. We'll talk about those. The first one being the replacement of a portion of the bleachers at Merrimack High School. This is critical because the section we're talking about is not only old and not necessarily as safe as it should be, but more importantly than that, it's not ADA compliant. So no one has taken us to task for that, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. The other component here is a approximately 20,000 square foot section of a roof at Reed's Ferry. It does leak. Parts of it were done in 1992 92 and 97, so we're looking at 20 to 25 years old. Obviously, like we've learned in past years, when we're talking about replacing roofs, we're now looking at 35 and 40-year warranties for new roofs. The roof that's there now is out of warranty. Would have expired in 2007. So we're looking at the roof there, and the good news here is it's part of the plan, so it's not a surprise. This is part of the SIP. Lastly, we talked about the addition of a district-wide PFOA water filtration system, and Tom, you probably might want to get into more details about that, but that's a system that would be put in all 6 of the schools to filter specifically the water that's used for consumption, so not water that's being used for toilets and things like this, but specifically water that that would be used for drinking and such. Is that a good start?
That's great. That's great.
I'll turn it over to you.
Okay.
Carol, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Not yet. I may have a question later on, but I'll hold off.
One of the things I'd like to add, and I imagine Tom's going to talk about it in more depth, is the PFOA water filtration system. I would like to applaud the school district for taking a positive step to get something done for the safety of our school children. And while the numbers are not over the quote-unquote safe limit, 0 is a much nicer number. And that's what you're striving to do. And when you look at the cost for this filtration system, yes, it's $128,000, as I remember, divided amongst 6 schools. That's the total cost. So it's about 20-something thousand per school. And that will put all of the water bubblers and food prep water going through the filtration system. And I think it's a very smart move on your part. And now, Tom, it's up to you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to start off by just adding a few more notes about the filtration system, PFOA. We went with a system that we have a lot of confidence in. It's a 2-tank system. The first tank will be the lead tank, which will do the filtering of almost all the PFOAs. By the time it gets to the second tank, when it's new, it's actually not filtering very much. But as the first tank sees some bleed through it, and PFOAs start going through, that's when the second tank picks it up. That's why it's important to have a 2-tank system. When the bleed through is at a certain point on the first tank, then we have to replace it. Then we take the second tank, move it to the first position, and get a brand new second tank. So as the bleed through comes, once again, it gets picked up by the second tank, so we never have any PFOAs in our water for our schools. It will be, as they said, just targeted at kitchens, water bubblers, a nurse's office, areas that we feel that people would be drinking the water. So it's pretty targeted where we're going to filter and how we're going to end up doing it. So we have a lot of confidence that we can take care of that over the summertime.
Let me just add a little bit.
Sure.
Just because I'm here, and I feel like I want to feel needed here. The reason, the method we're using, and Tom came up with the idea in conversation with our person that we were dealing with, is everything that's drinkable is going to be on a separate line. So there's going to be a line going back to the filtration system. So all new piping is going to be run to every fountain and every sink that's being used for food preparation in the kitchen. So that's how you get out of doing a whole school system where 85% of your water use is flushing toilets. You don't have to filter the whole school, you just filter the point of use through taking them off the main lines, running new lines from that water fountain, or from the 40, how many water fountains, 47?
I believe so.
47 water fountains in the high school, all going back to the centralized system. So it lowers the cost, it lowers the volume going through there, and it basically fits within the footprint of the building. The initial system we looked at was upwards of 800,000, but that was a whole school kind of filtration system. So this is a much better and much more exact to the point of where we want to be filtered to system that we would be providing for the schools. So it was the best situation we could figure out how to do it.
Keep going, Tom.
The next item I'll touch on is the bleachers that we talked about earlier. The bleachers is a small section back of the high school. As mentioned by Jordan, it is functioning the way it was designed many years ago. The unfortunate part is, well, the fortunate part is we've evolved in the way we look at bleachers and many safety things to the point where we don't have any center rails, we don't have handrails in certain areas, all things that we actually should and need to supply to have a safe audience there for any events that goes on in back. So that, as mentioned, it was on a SIP. There's other sets of bleachers later on coming in the SIP, so we're moving forward on that. And then the last item is obviously the section of roof that we're going to be doing at Reed's Ferry. Reed's Ferries has been a long coming item. We do have some leaks over there, but we've put a pretty enhanced schedule together as far as what's going to be coming up in roofs, and it's brought us actually a long ways. For at one point when we started this, we were approximately 70% of all our roofs were off warranty. So, and at this point we're down, after this roof, I think we're going to be under 30% of 30% of roofs off warranty, and actually less than that will be off by 5 years or less. So we've actually come a long ways, and I think we're heading in the right direction. And I think that's about all I have, unless Matt has anything, and I'd certainly take any questions.
Would you talk about those worn-out sinks that you're going to be replacing?
The sinks at Massacola Elementary School, it's one of the budget items. There's also a budget item I think every school really is pushing for. Personally, I felt a real connection to this one. It's sinks down there that, actually it's not the sink, it's the cabinet and the bases. They're rusted. They're very, I'm going to say punky at some point. The countertops are not functioning the way they should. So I'm very excited to see this portion in. We're targeting 11 areas at Massacola Elementary School to replace the sinks and cabinets. And in total, we have 22. So the thought was do half of it this year and take another whack and the other half next year. So obviously, our first pick would be the worst 11, and then we'll be coming up for the other ones next year, I believe.
And approximately how old are those units, total units?
Those are original, so I bet you there's people on this board that would know that better than me. It's been around here a little longer. I'm not sure.
Could have been there since the school was originally built.
Those were definitely there since the school has been originally built.
Questions for Tom? Oh, we got plenty of them. Heather?
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation. So you'll forgive me, I am not an expert in plumbing, but when we do the PFOA work, is there any fear when you were doing the estimation of how much this was going to cost of any pipes breaking because of age as you move them onto the system?
No, we'll be taking it right off of the supply and to be adding new lines. So there's going to be no reuse of anything. It's all going to be brand new, just repiped directly to the rooms.
Okay. And I do have one more question, but it's not related to PFOA, so if anybody else.
Oh,
Just keep going? Okay. So the other question I have is just an understanding of the process that maintenance goes through to determine, and I know that there's line items budgeted in here for signage replacements, painting, and those kinds of things. There are certain areas around the school that I've noticed probably needs to have some painting done, just for age or graffiti or those kinds of things, and also some signage that it seems really silly, but you want to be proud of your school and that kind of thing. So maybe some signage that needs to be replaced. What is the process that you go through with your team in order to know when or if something needs to be replaced, painted, updated, that kind of thing?
I think that's something that we take a look at year-round. We certainly look to the schools, because every year I sit down with the principals, and they give me the feedback and data that would suggest that things need to happen. If we're talking about signs, and I can tell you right now what's on my mind is if you're going up O'Gara, some of the no parking signs are certainly worn and need to be replaced. I often talk about, when we're talking about signs or painting or anything like that, we're kind of like a battleship. We never move very fast, but it's always evolving. So what could be really a hot button issue for us this year of that's the sign we need, just because everybody sees it, doesn't mean that's absolutely the worst one we have. So we always try to do an evaluation complete, and then we come back and make sure we try to make the best decisions on what needs to be done. But signs is definitely on our radar. We have done a number of them at different locations of schools, but I knew exactly when you started right where you were. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Thank you.
All set, Heather? David?
So just two things. I did see the cabinets when I did my tour with the elementary principals. They are disgusting. No other way to put it. They need to be replaced immediately, especially the one I saw. And then just my own curiosity, what's going on with the sewage at the high school? The water and sewage? It's like 8,000 higher expended last year.
Yeah, the track, it's related directly to putting in a new track. Many of times we had to rewash the track after storm events and stuff like that. So that's a one-time expense just related to the track.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Amanda? And then after Amanda, Kevin.
Okay, so with the PFOA filtering, I'm kind of curious about whether, does the school water come from the town? And if it does, is the town not filter? I mean, I know this is the town and not the school, but I'm kind of concerned that if it's from town water, are we filtering the town water enough? Because I agree with Stan that a zero PFA is much better than their zero limits. I'm very curious of where the school water comes from.
It does come from the town. You are correct on that.
It actually comes from the Merrimack Village District.
That's true.
They are a separate entity.
Okay, so this is to improve the water quality above and beyond what the town's getting for the school.
Yeah, because right now we've done several water testings of the schools, probably around 4 or 5 at different times of the year. And they're coming in anywhere from 15 to 20 parts per trillion, where the limit that the state, I don't know if the state has set it, but it's given, common knowledge around 70 parts per trillion. So we're under that 70 parts per trillion, and the water coming out from the MVD is under that 70 parts per trillion that's transported to our schools. But we're at around 20, and we want to bring it to 0. So that's why we are indeed going to be taking MVD water as it comes into our schools. We're going to be paying $128,500 to filter that schools to bring the PFOAs down to the drinking water level of 0.
And one more question. How long do those tanks last for, just out of curiosity?
How long do what?
The tanks last for? You said that you're going to have to replace
Yeah.
the first
Tom
one. And
has that.
That is yet to be determined, yet it depends on how much water is used through the domestic side. We don't have any data on that yet. We're thinking from the people we talk to, 85% of our water is disposed of. It's not for human consumption. So we're hoping that it might be every 3 to 4 years. It could be quicker than that, but we're not sure at this point. That's kind of what we're projecting at this point.
Yeah, we really haven't done like a peak flow analysis of what the drinking water would be. But yeah, Tom is right. Every 3 to 4 years, you'd probably have to change out one of the tanks. And tank 1 would go tank 2, the end tank would become tank 1, and then they would just be reversed. So I think the recurring cost is around maybe $3,500 each
Pretty
school.
close.
Pretty close, rough guess.
The other thing that we're going to see that we're going to do, and this is kind of on a level that we'll probably do it twice the first year, but every year we're going to have to test for PFOAs to find out when we have bleed out and when we don't of the first tank. So that'll be ongoing testing every year, but we don't expect to replace the tanks every year.
all right, thank you.
Thanks.
Kevin?
I guess that probably answered my question about, it's about $3,500 to replace the tank. We don't know exactly how long, okay. And thank you for putting this together, by the way, to do the extra filtering. Is there any process going on to contact our neighbor there, St. Gobain, to get them to reimburse us? Is there any, I know that we can't force that, but has there been any discussion with them to say, hey, this is something that's affecting our children in town?
That is something that I will leave to Board Member Schoenfeld to address. I don't know if we can talk to that at this point in time.
I believe it's something we cannot talk to at this time.
Noted. All right. Regardless, I think it's a prudent expenditure. Hopefully we can get some relief on that. The other question I have was regarding Reed's Ferry, and it seems like every year I've been on this committee we talk about roofs, so I've learned a lot about them. But it's not the entire roof, and I've heard from a source that I have in the school that it leaks in multiple areas. So I was just curious what area of the roof's getting replaced.
If you're looking at Reed's Ferry and you're in the main office and you're looking at almost a figure 8 in front of you, it'll be the two ends that are going to be, that's where the rubber roof is, and that's where we're going to focus. The two ends and the gym area.
So it's not all one 20,000 square foot section together?
No, it's
two
about,
areas.
I believe I got it broken down till 7 sections.
Oh, okay. Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Chuck Mower?
I need a little bit more information. What kind of a filtration system is this?
Activated charcoal. There's two types: activated charcoal. There's a reverse osmosis system. We chose to go with the activated charcoal because that will take out all the PFOAs, and it's a lot less expensive than reverse osmosis, and reverse osmosis takes up a much larger footprint, and there's a lot more mechanical items in it. So that's what we're speccing out right now.
You're sure this amount of money will cover the anticipated work?
Yes.
Did you explore any other filtration systems other than granular activated carbon?
Like I said, we did do an exploration on the reverse osmosis type system, and that was much more expensive.
And the school board has finally committed to having this in the operating budget.
Yes, it was placed in the operating budget.
I think it's an important step forward for our school district. I realize that the PFOA issue has been extensive in the community, but it is more than just PFOAs. We cannot keep up with the emerging chemical contamination in our country. It's going to get worse. And so, having this crisis been precipitated by Saint-Gobain, I think we're doing exactly the right thing in filtering our water for not only PFOAs, but for the other emerging chemicals that will be entering our water system. I can't think of anything more important than protecting the health of our children. There's been a great deal of argument about whether 20 parts per trillion or 70 parts per trillion or 2 parts per trillion or whatever is or is not a safe amount. We know that 0 is a safe amount. We have the ability and the technology to deliver 0. And I admit that PFOAs are not going to kill me. I'm going to die of something else, I'm quite certain. However, I don't even drink the water anymore in Merrimack. I find that it makes me nauseous. My dog will not drink the town water. I actually have to give my dog bottled water. Now, that may say something anecdotally about my disposition, but we know that chemicals affect different people in different ways, and particularly our youth, with smaller body sizes, smaller body mass, etc. And while most of us, the average individual, runs around every day without too much concern, there are people that are extremely sensitive to other chemical toxins and contaminants. And we have an obligation to provide the best we possibly can for our youth. I think that we also have an obligation to provide the best we can for all of our consumers in Merrimack, but I don't believe the village district sees it that way, nor apparently does Saint-Gobain. But I applaud the school district for ultimately deciding to fund this in the operating budget. It seems to me, on a matter of critical public health, that $128,000 and change is a small amount of money when you consider we had to spend $600,000 to get rid of bat guano. If we can spend that on bat guano, certainly we can spend $128,000 on clean water. Thank you.
Matt, I believe you said something, not tonight, but previous conversations about exploring with the state for any state money or federal money that may become available for a project like this?
Yes, that's correct. Seeing it's been on the website and it's been in the newspaper, I might as well say that the state, through their grant system, we applied for a grant early on. We had met with Marjorie Schoonemaker, who's in charge of school approval, and Amy Clark, who's not school approval, yeah, she is, and then Amy Clark, who's also up there from the Department of Ed. They came on site, they looked at our project, and we're approved for $180,000 reimbursement for the cost of that.
Okay.
It's been signed off by the governor. I don't know if it's been voted on by the executive council yet. I haven't heard yay or nay on that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Heather?
Just real quick, since we're talking about safety, I just really wanted to applaud the school district for the cameras that you're going to be adding. I'm sure our members here saw that there's at least 18 more cameras that are going to be coming into our high school, middle school, and also externally here. That is critical. I'll talk more about this later with the district budget for safety and for helping our administrators ensure that proper practices are occurring in our schools. So I just really wanted to applaud that. My question really is, do you, in your research of where cameras should be, I see that you worked with the administrators of every school, trying to figure out where these cameras should be. In that research, did you find that this will be sufficient, or are there additional cameras that you think will be needed in the future?
I would say this is probably round one of cameras. We kind of focused our attention this year on the high school and the middle school. And in the upcoming years, we did a comprehensive plan, but we didn't feel it would be fair. And it came to quite a bit of money to put it all in 1 year. So we split it up, and what we'll be doing over the next, I believe, 3 years, or could be a little longer, is every year we'll be looking at what our needs are, where do we need to improve, what kind of technology would help us, and making sure that we make prudent decisions about where we spend the money, and making sure that administration is very engaged in actually coming up with spots that they have an interest in.
Follow-up? So I really appreciate that, and definitely encourage the collaboration with the administration. However, I want to push just a little bit, if you'll allow me, that when it comes to not fair, I want to balance that fairness with making sure that our kiddos and our educators are safe, and that, I do believe that cameras can be a deterrent to bad behavior. So could you let me know, if it's not tonight, maybe sometime this week, you can send me an email just letting me know how much that original ask was for, and for how many additional cameras that would be for?
I can give you the price right now. It was around $500,000.
Okay.
That was for a complete interior, exterior coverage of all our buildings.
Great. That's for the complete coverage?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
So you'll be seeing this in coming budgets. We'll have a conversation with the board, lay it all out, and come up with a plan, much like our roof replacement plan.
Yep.
You see a camera upgrade plan probably every year for the next few years until we completely cover everything. And then you've got the cost of upgrading the old equipment. When we first started out years ago with cameras, I forget what year it was, and I think I know who was on the board. Jody Valancourt was the chair. And that was to get them in the high school, and I think it was around $200,000 to do that and do some exterior cameras. And those are all analog cameras going back to a DVR. And now we're doing IP cameras, which we've swapped out most of those analog cameras now going along the way. So there's going to be some replacement. It's kind of like the technology program that Nancy Rose has kind of put before you. There's going to be a camera replacement program, and then a camera additional program too. So it's something we definitely want to keep on now that we've brought it back into the operating budget the last few years.
And if I could also add to that, some of the cameras, when we originally had our intention, we were looking for the security of building. Basically, let's just do the perimeter, let's look at the windows, let's making sure we have a safe place. Now, through the years, we've learned that we need cameras on some of our playgrounds to keep track of the children and stuff. And I think this is going to be a big part of what you're going to be seeing in the upcoming years, is that we're not only going to be looking at trying to improve the cameras to see who's entering our building, but we also want to be able to look and make sure that everybody is on our facility as safe too, and that we can get real-time information back to like the main office. And I can tell you that almost every principal has talked to me in the way they very much used. They use it for as simple things like when buses arrive, when they go. The office has got real-time data for that. It's very important to them, and I think it's something that we're definitely looking into. Thank you.
Chuck Moore.
Could you please consider how much administrative time will be saved by the addition of cameras? Because we know that the kinds of incidences that take place do create a significant administrative response. And without videographic evidence, sometimes it gets a little more complicated, takes a little more time. And along the same lines, perhaps from our legal department, we could have some understanding of how it might reduce our exposure to liability and thus reduce costs, and from our insurer as well, that an investment like that would give us a return in, or there would certainly, we would anticipate there would be some benefit realized in insuring, as well as legal and administrative time. So the $500,000 sounds like a lot of money to people sitting at their kitchen table, but in fact there may be a substantial offset in what the cameras will actually achieve for us in the efficiency of all of those operations. It's not just about having the ability to see what's going on. It's a question of how to administrate, how to insure, and how to reduce exposures to liability legally. Honest to God, I would not want to be an administrator today. With all due respect, I understand the complicated nature of their work. Most people think it's just a question of telling the principals what to do and making sure that, you know, the kids get the lunch. But unfortunately, I think people would be shocked to know the pressures that are put upon administrators that have little to do with what we think takes place in education. And I think that these cameras would be a significant addition to facilitating all of the administrative management of the school district.
Thank you, Chuck. Anybody else? David?
Yes, Stan.
Okay, Carol, hold on one second.
Could you give
Okay.
could you give an estimate to the cost advantage of doing it in 1 year as opposed to the multi-year rollout? Is there any cost advantage to doing it?
Is there cost advantages? I don't really think so. The cost of the technology is kind of going down as it gets, you know, better. So I don't think there's any significant cost savings in spreading it out as opposed to doing it in one lump sum. The only good thing about one lump sum is everything's up all at the same time. It's all of the same vintage, but that can work against you too when you're looking at a replacement schedule. So,
Okay, thanks.
yeah.
Carol?
Yeah, couple things. One is back to the water filtration. I'm very relieved that you're not going with a reverse osmosis system, because I have firsthand knowledge of that system in my house here in Florida, and while it gives you wonderful water, the flow rate is pathetic. And from what I hear, that's typical. It's not just my system. What I am wondering is, because you're going with the activated charcoal, does that have a significantly better flow rate?
Oh, it's my understanding it would barely, you wouldn't even notice it. I know the reverse osmosis does bring it down quite significantly because there's a lot of gyrations it has to go through, but I wouldn't think we would see a difference in the flow at all with that system.
Well, that would just be something I'd like to, before we spend a lot of money, I just would like to have some certainty as to that. I think you're probably right, but I just want to make sure because I know I'm one person, and if I want to fill a water glass from my little spigot for my reverse osmosis, I stand there probably a good full minute to fill one little glass of water. And so I'm multiplying that off of filling cooking pots and filling, people drinking out of the fountains and whatever. So I do want to make sure that the flow rate is going to be adequate. I think it is going to be, but I'd just like some assurance on that. And the other thing is I'm curious on the warranties we're getting on roofs because we keep getting longer and longer warranties, which if those warranties live up to their advertisement, that's a great thing. What I've been hearing, and I'm talking more in terms of residential, so it may be a whole different ball game because I've been talking to roofers regarding shingles and such, and they're basically laughing at me. They're saying, yeah, 30-year warranty, yeah, you're not going to get 30. You'll be lucky if you get 20. And they're telling me that's like fairy dust, those warranties. So I'm just wondering, are the warranties that we're getting on our roofs, are they something that actually is going to, hold up over time?
Carol, actually, a few years ago when we started getting these extended warranties, they were 35, 40-year non-prorated warranties by the manufacturer of the roofing material, and it had to be installed by an authorized installer that the manufacturer approved.
So they can't then go back and play games with the manufacturer blames the installer and the installer blames the manufacturer. And
it'd be kind of tough to do if they authorize the installer.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm asking, because I know it hasn't affected me. I haven't needed a new roof, thankfully, but I have known a lot of people that have had them, and they had what they thought were 30-year roofs that went after, I know one family after 12 years it went. And when they went back to where they had it done, they said, oh, yeah, well, those roofing warranties are like fairy dust. Those don't mean anything.
No, these are written down in the contract documents, so... Yeah,
that isn't the case, Carol.
No, not the case.
Okay.
Anybody else?
That's all I had.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
At this time, we are going to take a 10-minute recess. We'll be back here at 8:55. In this meeting of the Budget Committee, we are now going to go over the district-wide budget, and there'll be one other thing after that that will be handed out to everybody. I'd like to welcome the superintendent and her two trusty assistants. Marge, would you do the honors, please, and introduce everybody at your table?
I'm Marge Jaffrey, the superintendent. To my left is the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and assessment, Dr. Mark McLaughlin. To my right is the assistant superintendent for business, Matt Chevanel.
Thank you. The liaisons were myself, Heather, John Hanson, and Carol Lang. Marge, would you like to start, or would you like us to start?
I would like you to start, please.
Okay. We had a very cordial meeting at 7:30 yesterday morning, and one of the things the superintendent had said was that the operating budget for the district is up 0.74%. And given the fact that one of the major increases in the budget for that is health care, which is only up 3.6%, I believe it was, Matt?
3.5. 3.5.
3.5%, okay. And it's still under the default. And what they've attempted to do was to make it as level funded as possible given the constraints put on them. We're going to be briefly discussing a couple of things in terms of warrant articles, but we're not going to be discussing them for the purposes of voting tonight. It'll just be an informational little session on the warrant articles coming up, and you will have a piece of paper to review them for next week. Heather, would you like to add anything? Because you're a very good detailed person.
Well, no, actually, I'm not. Thank you very much, Dan. So just thank you so much for the hospitality yesterday. We really appreciate all of you taking the time out of your very busy schedules to sit down with us and explain the district-wide budget. I'm always concerned because I am a huge supporter of the work that you do when we have a levelized funding budget, or, you know, just with this very little increase. At the same time, I really appreciate it as a taxpayer and a member of this community that you are so diligent in making sure that every penny that is spent in an appropriate way. I really appreciate the funding that you're putting into professional development. I want to talk about that a little bit more later in some areas that I think we should possibly think about adding some more focused areas or focused professional learning. And so with that, I don't have any other detailed information in there that I want to point out, just that I really appreciate the hard work, not only at the district-wide budget, but the district as a whole and your leadership with that. So thank you.
John, do you have anything you'd like to chime in on?
No.
And last but not least, Carol?
No, I'm all set.
Okay, it's all yours.
Whoops, thank you. Before I turn it over to Matt, because I want him to point out 2 or 3 of the areas in addition to what Stan and Heather said, one of the things that we were saying to our liaisons is that for us, the district team that works with all of the building administrators, we look at the budget process holistically, meaning not only the elements in the operating budget that you've been going through, but also all of the warrant articles that we want to propose for the board to take a look at. So the reason I wanted to point out the operating budget being 0.74% over last year's budget was the fact that we really took a look at what the children's needs were up against what we felt the taxpayers were going to be facing. And because of a number of large warrant articles, we just took that into consideration. So we were looking very holistically at the whole of it. And I think when you get the warrants tonight, you'll understand more clearly what I'm saying. That being said, the parts of our budget that usually command attention are the health insurance, which Stan has already mentioned. But then there are approximately 5 other areas that usually people want to speak about. So I've asked Matt to highlight those for you.
Thank you very much. As the superintendent stated, this budget is 0.74% higher than last year's. It's around $550,000 higher than last year's. It's also $300,000 under the default budget. You'll see that when you look at the warrant articles. So we're $300,000 under default. We're less than 1% over last year's budget, while still incorporating in the district budget and in other budgets, like you heard, maintenance, an increase in the New Hampshire retirement for our professional staff. This isn't an increase in the rate, but it's an increase because we had a contractual salary increase for the teachers. So that added around $234,000 to the budget. And also because of that contractual increase that was voted on 3 years ago, FICA district-wide increased around $107,000. Our regular transportation contract went up 3.5%. That's a $76,000 increase. And then we had a decrease in our debt service payment, our interest payment. We have a level principal variable, not variable rate interest, I don't want to say that, it's standard. But every year our interest drops as we make a payment, so that was decreased by around $56,000. So when you look at that, that's a significant amount of money, and you still have an increase of $500,000. And then when you look at the maintenance budget combined, if I can talk about things holistically here, wrapping it all up, you'd have the cameras for $47,000, the art room cabinets for $46,000, CAF tables for $48,000, the water filtration system for $128,000, bleachers for $320,000, and a roof for $507,000. So in this budget, you're getting all these things, plus our contractual obligations are basically our fixed costs of New Hampshire retirement, FICA, transportation, etc., for an increase of less than 1% or $550,000, which is $300,000 lower than the default budget. So in summary, that's the district budget, and in real kind of short summary, that kind of reflects the budget as a whole as far as what I look at the bottom line and from what I see. So that's about all I have to comment on right now.
So we're happy to take any questions that you have.
Questions for the administration or comments? Heather.
So bear with me for just a moment, because this, I want to try to get this all in for the record, but also to just kind of lay the foundation for what I'm thinking. So over the last, just the last month, there have been more and more children dying in schools and being wounded and suffering from trauma because of school shootings. Our school district, as we just talked about, has put an emphasis with the school board's approval on security cameras. We have great partnerships with our partnership with our police department, and they allow for 2 of their officers to serve in our school district to be school resource officers, be mentors, be partners with our educators and administrators in our schools. And I'm very, very grateful for that, being an aunt of 2 amazing nieces that go to school here. In full transparency, I also am engaged to one of those school resource officers, and I think that's an important reflection on what I'm about to talk about. But I also think that with that partnership and how we have truly shown the town how we really take these kinds of things seriously with the cameras, with the resource officers, but also with Mark and Marge's leadership around the school wellness committee, and really focusing on what that means to have trauma for every student that comes into our schools, that respect for those kids that go through that kind of thing, that respect that we need to have for trauma that educators are going through, those people that are really focused on helping our students learn every day. We also need to reflect on what the school district will be doing or should be doing in professional learning for all of our staff, but particularly for our school resource officers, for training around trauma, around mental illness, around active shooters, such as an ALICE kind of training or something along those lines, and how important that training is every year. We're talking about a couple professional development opportunities for those resource officers to then come back and have the time to be able to invest with our educators, our administrators, our guidance counselors, and other staff on what they learned and how we can all learn together, that professional learning transfer, if you will, of what we learned at every one of our conferences that we attend. that is critical to the work that you're trying to do in your schools. I know you all believe that because we've invested for a very long time in the support and that partnership that we have with the police department. And I think we need to continue to monitor that. We need to continue to think more of that. Our school resource officer, Detective Prentice, at the middle school has a couple more years on a grant that allows him to be able to work at our schools. I think we need to be thinking about the long-term solution to that because as we talked about last week with our principal at our middle school is how effective that relationship has been at the middle school. So we need to continue to think about those things. So I will be next week making a recommendation for focused professional learning. I am not willing to accept to take that professional development line that we have in there for our educators and our administrators and just say, well, we'll use some of that money for our school resource officers. I think that's important for our educators and our administrators right where it is. I think we need to really reflect on how much financial investment we want to make to continue to grow the knowledge and skills of those folks that we have partners with in our school district. So you're going to that is something that I will bring forward next week and would be willing to take any questions from administrators, but also from the board members. But to end with a question, as we like to do, I'd love to know your thoughts on that and any type of reflection that you might have.
I think everything you said is extremely important. The first thing I'd start with is how blessed we are in Merrimack to have the relationship we have with the Merrimack Police Department as well as the Merrimack Fire Department. And I say the Fire Department because they're the ones that work with us on our evacuation drills and fire drills. And so it really is both units together. We have done training in active shooter, the active shooter training as well as emergency management planning, but I never think you can do too much. So our staff continues to change over the years, which means that we need to have ongoing training. So we are very open to any suggestion you have, as well as Matt has been working with Homeland Security. We are going through each building and looking at each one unto itself. When we get through each of them being thoroughly looked at, then we will come back before the board and do a formal presentation, which will lead to, for lack of a better term, it's like doing another capital improvement plan, except this will be on a number of additional security measures. What I am pleased to say is that as this has happened, and he's been overseeing it, that we have had very favorable reports about all the efforts that have been made by the Merrimack School Board on our behalf over time, with more things to come. But it's to our advantage to get through the 6 reviews and come back with a comprehensive plan as compared to doing it in partist fashion. So definitely an ongoing effort, never to be done, shelved. You're never finished when you're dealing with security. It's ever moving. Do you want to say something?
I'll say a little bit. And this is something that we really haven't had a conversation with the school board yet, because it's a cake that's not fully baked yet. We've gone through 2 reviews. We have the high school set for February 15th, and Scott Lambertson from the Department of Homeland Security comes down. There's a questionnaire that needs to be filled out by administration before he arrives on scene. He comes on scene with one of his deputies, and they go through your building. They spend around 3 to 4 hours. With the high school, they'll probably spend around 5 to 6 hours going through every area, looking at the egresses, looking at your security cameras, and they write up a really nice report that we'd be willing to share with the board. And it's kind of like a guiding document, and the rest of the schools will be done by the end of March. and it takes Scott maybe another 6 weeks to put together the formal report that we'd have at each school. So it'd be kind of a guiding document as to what recommendations he makes from his standpoint, being a professional in the field. And we're lucky to have him coming here and paying attention to Merrimack. So it's something that we're going through right now, and hopefully we'll finish that up and we'll be able to make some sort of a presentation and get some conclusions and some guidance for future budgets. That's what we'd be looking at for this.
Any other questions or comments? Chuck?
The administration's done a remarkable job of essentially level funding this school district for the last 5-6 years. Yes, the numbers go up and down here and there, and Matt is very adept at describing the intricacies of all that, but when push comes to shove and everything is said and done, we've essentially level funded our school district for a considerable period of time, to the credit of the administration and, I guess, the school board. So we're up 0.74% this year. Could you please tell us what percentage of our budget is discretionary?
Really very little. When you look at everything you have to do to be an approved school in the state of New Hampshire, I would probably say, discretionary spending, it's got to be around the 10% maybe discretionary, and that's looking at, do you really have to do the roof, or don't you have the roof, or can you put the roof off? I mean, would you want to call that discretionary? I don't know. I call that good planning and foresight. So, 90% we could say that are contractual obligations in order to meet school approval, and there's probably that extra 10% that makes us what we are as far as a good institution with good facilities and good people in place.
So the things that most parents dream of implementing in a school district, their wants as opposed to their needs, really falls into a very small percentage of the budget. And so to accomplish educating complete people, while we respect a level-funded budget, we may consider that we've done such a very good job that 0.74 is almost an insignificant increase in the budget, and that perhaps we ought not to be so frightened of spending on things that really would make us just that much better for the investment. We know we would get a return on those investments. It's not like putting in a giant swimming pool.
Carol, do you have anything?
I have one question, and I don't know where it fits in, so I'll put it in here. What is our current graduation rate, approximately?
It's very high. I would prefer Carol coming back next week and giving you the exact percentage, but it's very good. That would
but
be
I
fine. Prefer
fine.
giving you a solid number next week.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Carol. Any other questions or comments for the administration regarding the general operating budget? Boy, you guys are getting off easy tonight. You had something you wanted to say, Matt? You kind of put your finger up a little bit.
agrees with you.
No, I agree with you. I was just gesturing. and
Okay.
You're right.
Okay.
You're
That's very
correct.
sad. You're right.
Did you hand these out yet, Pat? Okay. At this time, we're going to hand out a draft copy, and it's marked draft, because the school board has not officially voted on these warrant articles yet. We're not here to discuss them this evening. That's next week, along with our work session, where we will discuss them and work on them. This is for you to have a look at, formulate your questions, and I offered Matt and the superintendent a little bit of time if they want to briefly say something about these for our thoughts for the coming week. Just to let you know, Article 1, as you can see, is the election of officers. Article 2 is to accept and expend monies for gifts. Article 3 is going to be the contract between the school district and the educational support staff, and as you can see from looking at it, it is a 3-year contract. Article 4 is if 3 is defeated, they can call another meeting. Article 5 is to deposit $150,000 in the Emergency Repair Capital Reserve Fund, because they spent some of it already this year. Article 6 is a $214,000 article for paving at Thornton's Ferry. Article 7 is $275,000 to purchase the former Ceresc property, commonly known as the Red Building, which is across from the Blue Building, which is our Student Services Office. Article 8 is for the funding of full-day public kindergarten. And Article 9 is the operating budget with the ensuing default budget. So, Matt, if you have anything, or Marge, or Mark, if you have any other quick information you would like to give about this for our thoughts for the week.
Thank you, Stan. You've done a great job of going through and highlighting them, and I think this is the document that I wanted you to see relative to the operating budget, to understand that when we sit and put the whole thing together before we go to the board, we're trying to look at what do we think would be a good warrant article as compared to what goes into the operating budget. So I think if you look at 5 of these, what I call the 5 major entities, you can see that that's what we were thinking as we were putting it together. In other words, the collective bargaining agreement for the support staff is terribly important to us. That's a group of people whom we care a lot about, and the fact that we have something before you is a goal that we had. We wanted this completed before we got to the board and got to you. The filling of the capital reserve fund, you realize because of the issue that we had with bat mitigation, it was the notion of coming back and trying to fill that fund because it just seems that there are unanticipated events that happen, and you just need to be ready to take care of whatever comes your way. There are 2 elements that have been on the capital improvement plan for a period of time. The paving at Thornton's Ferry is something that if you look back at prior capital improvement plans, you'll see that that's been sitting there for a period of time. The purchase of Brentwood for hopefully a new SAU office, I think Stan can probably talk about that better than anyone, because that has been on, I believe, 16 years trying to figure out what to do with those of us that reside in the greenhouse and the blue house and the fusion therein. And the thing I want to point out, and we'll come back and talk about it more fully next week, is we have tried desperately to listen to the public about what the public wants. And I think what we feel that we heard is the public wants us to look at a dwelling within Merrimack that we could renovate and make a place for us as compared to something new or putting something on O'Gara Drive. So the notion of purchasing Brentwood, we think, makes a whole lot of sense. And so that becomes terribly important. And probably most important, other than the collective bargaining agreement, is putting forward full-day kindergarten. Our first class who had half-day kindergarten is graduating this year in 2018. So we've had half-day kindergarten for 13 years, and we have been talking about this for a very long time. We've had a kindergarten task force in place that has looked at all of its aspects, and we just feel strongly its time has come. And so that's why, you know, you needed to just look at these warrant articles in tandem with the operating budget to understand the reason that we try to be as prudent in the operating budget, because it's how much can one bear, but all of these are terribly important articles to us. So, a summary.
Yes.
Are you fine with it?
Yes.
Yes? Yes?
Okay. Yes.
Just a procedural question. With the language of each one of these, is that something that the school board is looking at, not only what the topic is, but also how it's written? And if we do have suggestions for, or if someone in the public has suggestions for those changes, is that something that we can approach the school board about?
So you need to know that this document has already gone to legal counsel and to the DRA.
Okay.
So this document might be one that you would look at and say, but it doesn't say everything that you just said, or, you know, there's more that needs to be said. So we put a voter's guide together, and in the voter's guide that Matt oversees, that's when we try and take a more formal presentation and try and make it our own to be understood.
That's all I needed.
But this has to be presented
In a certain
as
way.
it's given to you.
Thank you.
Yes, Jordan.
I don't know if this is the place for it, but I do want to go on the record to bring something up, because I'm confused, and I don't know if the public is confused, but maybe to the best of your abilities and how it impacts, and I'm talking specifically about the full-day kindergarten article. I was under the impression from press that supposedly Keno was going to pay for full-day kindergarten. What's the connection between the Keno revenues and full-day kindergarten, and specifically in Merrimack, where we don't have Keno yet? What if we get it? What if we don't? How does that affect, if at all, the warrant article for full-day kindergarten? I mean, what's the relationship between that money that supposedly that's how we got Keno in the state, was it's going to pay for kindergarten? Where's the connection? If I live in Merrimack, what do I need to know about having Keno in the state and specifically our town? Does it have any bearing on this?
We have been assured by the DRA, and Matt can talk further, that it doesn't come down to whether our town voted to have it or not. We will have access to it, aid, and it's $1,100 per child for the year 2018-2019. That was one of the questions that we asked, and we have it documented on paper in an email to make sure of it. So you're already getting $1,800 per child if you have half-day kindergarten. So there's an additional $1,100, which is the Keno money, so that's $2,900 per child. Now, that comes with a stipulation for the Keno part that you must offer it, kindergarten, to all children. All children. So in other words, if you've been a district that's been doing some kind of a payment plan, so you had half-day kindergarten, and then in the afternoon you had a pay scale for people to pay. That is not offering it to all children. So it's an equalizer, is the point. And so when we went forward with this, it was our intention to ensure that this would be offered to all 5-year-old children in Merrimack, and that we would not get into some kind of payment plan, because we really think this program is important for all of our children. Do you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Let's say the increased state aid we'd get year one would be around $240,000. I have to show what the gross cost of public kindergarten is. I can't take the 878 and subtract 240 from it and put up a lesser number. So whatever the gross cost of it is, regardless of any revenues, I have to put that number in here. What I do on my revenue sheet that I have right here, I also put a corresponding revenue that says full-day kindergarten aid. Right now I have a TBD next to it, but it's, you know, it's around the $240,000 mark. And then the following year you get the Keno money. But it doesn't matter if you have Keno in your town or you don't get Keno in your town. Everybody gets the Keno money. Manchester has probably 40 Keno places, and that doesn't mean they get 40 times more than Merrimack. It all depends on, do you have full-day kindergarten, what's your average daily membership, how many kids do you have, and then you get the money. So you don't have to vote as a community to allow Keno in your community to get the Keno money.
All set, Jordan?
Very good,
Kevin?
thank you.
On the Keno, though, I think you said 240,000, so Keno does not fully fund full-day kindergarten.
Nothing fully funds it, no.
Right. All right. I think that's some of the confusion I've heard as well, that,
No.
you know, that's the scuttlebutt, if you will, that, hey, you know, this is, why wouldn't we do it? It's free,
Yeah,
but it's not.
Well, I would
and
call
not
it,
even close.
it's an incentive
Absolutely.
to go forward. That's
But
what
it's
we
still-
should say.
It's
But
an ongoing cost to the
Correct.
town if we choose to do this.
Correct.
A significant amount of money. And the 800, and maybe we've talked about this, but, so where is it? 878,000 is the article? Is
That
right?
includes the additional personnel to put full-day kindergarten in place and the original equipping, because we have some empty classrooms that need furniture and the curriculum materials.
So what would be the cost that would be in the operating budget year two?
Oh. Year two would be 808,000 probably times the, year two times, which is the amount of the staff increase, which would be the.
So it's just
and then
minus the
plus
69,000, which is the
Correct.
equipment.
Yeah.
So it's an additional 808,000 roughly
Right.
every year. That number will change based on enrollment
Yeah,
and all that.
and
but
if you could have,
Right.
have different teachers, you could have some come in, some move, different salaries.
Sure.
But that would be the year two cost.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other comments about the draft warrant articles?
Stan, this is just for you. Would you please email me those documents?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I would like to thank you for sitting here in those comfy blue seats all night. Before I go to other public participation, next week is our work session, and we will formally discuss the warrant articles that involve money, and we will be voting on the warrant articles that involve money. So if you have adjustments to the operating budget, please bring them with you next week for our work session, and have the account number you're looking to take money from or add money to. And if it's an item that, I'll just use an example. Let's say it's for a person, a position in the budget that you want to add to or take away. You can just give the position and the approximate total of what that cost is, because Matt has the ability to let you know pretty much dead on how much the exact cost is when you add in FICA and all that other good stuff. And at this point in time, I will open it up for public participation. And it looks like we have a lot of empty blue seats. And I will now close public participation. I would like to thank you all. It was a very informative evening, and we're doing our job. And I would just like to say that, being a Patriots fan, I hope you all watch the Super Bowl and root for the Patriots. And I believe Shirley Jacoby and his daughter and her daughter are going to the Super Bowl this year to represent the Merrimack School District Budget Committee. Does anybody have anything else they want to impart?
Stan, this is just a aside,
Hold that thought.
but we must have had a particularly interesting budget committee meeting tonight, because Ginger has been sitting in my lap with her paws in the budget book.
Well, I'm glad to know that. She
I
got,
wish I had a picture.
she got elected to that position with you.
Yeah, right, and she's very into it this year.
Well, you know, she's concerned.
She's 18 years old. Maybe she thinks she came of age.
Well, you know, take her down and register to vote.
I'd like to try, but...
Mr. Muller, you had something you wanted to say. Do I have a second? Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Carol, good night.
Oh, good night.
I don't want to do a roll call vote. All those in favor of adjourning? All those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. See you next Tuesday night, 7 o'clock.